This session is about maybe something we don't hear too much about in sociocracy. It's the whole notion of hierarchy. It's even I would say some people find the word offensive, but I'm hoping after this session you'll see why, in my view, in my mind, balancing hierarchy and sociocracy is very doable. So my name is Francine Proulx-Kenzle, and I live in Saskatchewan, Canada. And I'm going to tell you the story of a client of mine. And I will open my, just let me share with you my screen. Okay, so I'll give you a few images to look at. And okay, here we go. So I'm going to tell you the story of l'Assemblée Communautaire Francescoise, which is a nonprofit organization in close to where I live, and how they were able to integrate hierarchy and sociocracy. So the ACF, that's how I'll refer to the organization from now on. The whole their whole name is quite long. So the ACF, actually, the executive director knew me from a previous time when we both had worked at the university, and that was 10 years ago. And back then, this executive director was actually the person who had done some research. He wanted to find a different way of organizing and creating a workplace, making decisions. So he found sociocracy. So to make a long story short, I was elected to be the in-house trainer. So I was mentored by John Buck at the time, and have become certified through the Sociocracy group with their head office in the Netherlands. And today I continue to work now as a part-time consultant. I juggle a lot of different projects, a part-time sociocratic consultant, and I work with the Sociocracy consulting group, and also I'm connected with the global TSG. So last year, the ACF director calls me, says, Francine, I think he'd been there 1 year. He said, we need to implement sociocracy here. I'd like you to come in and work with me on this. So there's 17 employees from diverse cultural backgrounds and spread out in 3 separate locations. And the cultural background was an important piece of the whole puzzle, because it was interesting to find out how people coming from different cultures had a different view of hierarchy, or a different view of who the boss is and what the boss should do. So you could have assumed it would have been easy to implement sociocracy when the executive director says, okay, team, you know, this is it. We're going to start doing this now. But he knew better, the executive director. So he thought he needed time to get buy-in, to reassure, you know, give information, etc. So before I go on, I want to make sure we all understand hierarchy the same way. This is the Wikipedia version, a system or organization in which people or groups are ranked one above the other, according to status or authority. Now, you've all seen the cartoon with the birds on different wires and what happens to the birds at the bottom. Well, I didn't want to put that slide on there, but you can imagine that one. But what I did find is a quote about hierarchy from an Eli Culbertson, who's a bridge player, Wikipedia tells me. He says, a deck of cards is built like the purest of hierarchies, with every card a master to those below it, and a lackey or servant to those above it. So that's interesting, because I think of life as a game sometimes, and depending what game you're playing, that ace might be very powerful, or it might be at the bottom, something at the bottom of the hierarchy. So coming back to sociocracy and hierarchy, it's all about context. So here you have a drawing that shows, policies, operations. There's sort of these two humans just, standing there holding hands. Yes, that's a good thing. But they're doing a dance actually between policies and operations, and they work well together because they're balanced. So making room for one or the other, depending on what kind of decision your group, your team is going to be making, is what makes a difference. So I'm not sure how well versed or how much you know about sociocracy and the importance of differentiating between what a policy meeting, a policy decision is, as compared to an operations meeting. So a policy meeting, you can imagine, that would encompass global, actions, allocations of resources, marketing, strategic planning. That's the policy piece. How a team or how a group is going to show up in the world. And then the operations is a nitty gritty, in the moment activities that bring to life the policies. They actually, if you can have all the beautiful policies in the world, but if you don't have an operations piece to your system, you're not going to get very far. So policy decisions, it's the what, who, where, when, why. Operations decisions, the how. This is how Sharon Villeens describes it. She's the co-author of We the People. This is how she describes the difference between the two types of decisions. So the confusion whether to use policy decisions or operations decision can be lessened when you ask yourself, okay, what are we looking for here? Is it how we're going to do stuff? Well, that's probably an operations decision once you have decided the what it is and who's going to do it and all that goes around that. So it makes a lot of sense to ask the how to differentiate between a policy and an operations. An example of the how could be, the operation of machinery. What type of how we're gonna dig this this basement for this building that we're going to construct. Well, it could be using machinery or the shovel, but how is the operations part of it? Certainly not the policy part of it. And the how can also be, specific purchasing according to the policy. For example, if your job is to purchase office supplies, you will set your decisions on the policy that's in place. That may be that the organization purchases supplies from a local neighborhood store. So that's going to clearly define which business you're going to choose. You're going to choose a local business as opposed to the business, 1,000 kilometers away. So again, the how in operations actualizes the policy decision. So at the end of the day, you can see that an organization will run its operations much more smoothly when policies are clear and they're in place. I'll talk about that a little bit too. The operations themselves could be influenced up to a point with the sociocracy aspect, depending on the type of leader that is in the operational role. I've often noticed and that after a while, an organization that's using sociocracy will basically let, I call it the spirit of sociocracy, immerse throughout the organization. So even when the functional leader is in a meeting and, designating people left and right to do things, he or she may consider, checking in and getting feedback, although really in an operations, it's not necessary. Is everybody okay with the sound? I'm hearing a bit of feedback. Okay. Okay. So this is what the ACF operational hierarchy looks like. Remember, it's a small group, 17 people. They had 3 separate silos, though. Community development, administration and finance, and employment. I'm sorry, I'm hesitating because Jerry, can you help with the sound? Okay, I'll continue. So this is the operational hierarchy chart, and the culture at the ACF before the executive director was looking at implementing or bringing in sociocracy was, the traditional culture where, expecting the boss to have the vision and then to deploy, what needs to be done. So everyone is waiting. There's not too much initiative taking in this culture. So there was some work to be done. And how that started, of course, was just to start training and talking about sociocracy as a possibility in this organization. So
I think Alex is not muted, and there may be some background there.
okay, thank you. If Alex can mute, then. Okay. So here's the ACF now in their latest hierarchy organization. It's the sociocratic hierarchy. It's a circular hierarchy where you've got, the typical feedback loops between each sub-circle into the general circle. And you'll notice I have put the elected volunteered board in little dots because that piece they haven't subscribed to sociocracy yet. We're not there yet in our phases. So, and the elected volunteered board is a democratically elected board by the whole, by a very large region that represents a whole region, and of course, with the ACF, has the vision for the whole of the area. So the first step that I did to when I was working with the ACF was to hold that initial training session, and it was made clear. It was a whole day, and it was made clear that the idea was to provide information and see if actually the 17 employees would consent to a pilot project, to trying this out. So, and they did. They consented to trying out, being trained for sociocracy for 6 months. And then it was evaluated after that. And of course, we are continuing with it because, and adjusting, they're in the, what's interesting when I'm working with groups is to really customize or taking into account how each team is, or each organization has its unique aspects to it. So you can't just bring a cookie cutter and say, okay, here it is, this is how it fits. And the other thing to remember too is that the idea of, oops, sorry, I didn't want to do that yet. The idea of having a circular hierarchy does not mean that your regular pyramid type hierarchy is leaves. So so whenever there's operation, whenever there are operation meeting, the hierarchy switches to meet the context at that point. So can the two live together? Can the two live together? Policy decisions and operations and hierarchy and all that. How does it play out? Well, I like to think that it does play out in very organic, very very organic, very natural way. You know, when you look at this picture and you see all the pieces of what sociocracy, takes in, we have the values and our principles, the applications, we have the structure, we do rounds, we have an aim, and we have to ensure we know what our services or products are. We use proposal. All that is it's like a piece of the puzzle, and then the policy making and operational basically plays. This is where the dance comes in. Are we talking about policy, or are we now going into an operational mode? So it's very important to keep in mind which one is which. Remember, it's the how in the operational that will help determine if it should be dealt with, if this decision should be dealt with outside of a policy meeting. The worst thing that can happen is, meetings are we have to meet, we have to get together to make decisions, and those can take times and can take time and energy from people. So it's important to ensure that your meetings are constructed in such a way to hold the proper context. Is it policy? Is it operations? And this is where the hierarchy, you use your different hierarchy to work through it. So organizations are unique living systems, like I said. So really that hierarchy, you can create it by balancing the policy making and the operational, being very aware of it. And if you make, a mistake, or if you think, oh, gee, that didn't work very well, next time, that's okay. It's all building your experience to make sociocracy really fit your organization. So at this point, I shut off my phone, so I have no idea what time it is. And I'd be happy to have a conversation with, have your feedback or your questions. So I see a few faces that I know, and new faces, new people that I've met. This is so exciting, yeah. So,
Francine?
Yes.
I love the way that you describe policies versus operation. That policies is the what, who, where, when, why, and the operations is how. There's another way that I've heard it. I've heard policies being defined recently in a webinar with Jerry, I think it was Kendrick. Anyhow, he was saying that policies is for something that even on the operational level that has to be done repeatedly. When it has to be done repeatedly, you don't want to have to come down and have a meeting every time something has to be done as to how we're going to do it. So we set a policy for it. I liked.
So it's a response to having to get things done always repeatedly. Yeah. That makes sense, because then once a policy is set, even if it's evaluated, you don't have to come back all the time.
Exactly.
Thank you, Mukunda, for that insight. I like that.
Thank you, Francine.
Well, and this is Stephanie. I so love that you had the board who was not into sociocracy yet. So I'm getting ready to work with people who none of them in the system are familiar with it. So I wonder if you have any advice on kind of developmental steps of how you would maybe take pieces of sociocracy, whether or not it's rounds or whatever. I just figure you have a lot of wisdom on this topic.
Thank you. Well, maybe what I can offer, this board that I'm working with, They meet to make decisions, and it's policy decisions because they just think of the big thing. So I'm thinking, and I'm not there yet. I have to, and the other challenge is that it's the board is spread out throughout the province, so it's a virtual thing. And so what I'm thinking is to help them practice making decisions, the regular way, and then the sociocratic way. I'd like them to compare and just get a feel of that, because their meetings are 2.5 days long, so there's lots of room. Yeah, they meet only 4 times a year. And so I'm thinking that's one way, and I'm open to any other ideas to plant that seed in the board members.
I love that. You're giving them experiential data on the spot.
Yeah. I find that whenever I'm teaching, if I can use real life stuff, then the people that are often have the tendency to be impatient and they don't want to lose any time will feel a bit more reassured when you use, their the resolutions they're looking for.
Yeah.
Francine, I'm noticing that there's a couple questions in the chat also. Would you like me to read them for you?
Yeah, please, would you?
Sure. A question from Wiro. He says, I missed the balancing out. Can you explain more about what you mean by balancing hierarchies and how that could benefit an organization?
Okay. I think of the hierarchies, both of them existing within the organization, and the balancing for me, is to be aware of when to use policy and when to use operations. And it's not 50-50, but it's a matter, by balancing, you see my hands, it's always going like this, so that you're never falling off, because you're balancing both contexts. Does that help, Whittle? You come back. Tell me more. What would you like to know, or what would you like to say? If you can unmute.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yes. Go ahead.
I just was wondering, because I think that many organizations that are trying to adapt things like this have sometimes problems in both in sort of losing this hierarchy, this authority of people deciding about others. So I was wondering if, in balancing out, if you had some other ideas of how to overcome that type of I won't say fight, but that type of resistance, let's say.
Well, if I understand correctly, you're wondering about how people in their role can live within balancing those hierarchies. Would it be, and I'm not sure if I'm understanding your question, but my interpretation would be to ensure that each person in their role, whether they're in sociocracy, there of course there's equivalence and everybody's voice is heard, and we know that. In the typical traditional hierarchy, depending on the organization, sometimes there's protocols to follow. So it's just that balancing is to know when I'm in this role and when I'm in that role, so that you don't step on each other's toes. And the good thing is, I think it evolves over time. Any organization evolves just like we do as individuals. So I think if on the sociocracy side, when people are really open to the feedback and trying things, then maybe the hierarchy part, the traditional hierarchy part, will soften. And if it was at all very rigid, it may soften. I call that the spirit of sociocracy that infiltrates in the traditional hierarchy. I hope I was able to touch a little bit on your question, Miro.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Can I add just something I'm thinking? So in whatever role I have my autocratic authority, freedom to act within some limits that are set by the policy. If I do some things that then raise issues where people question what I've done, then I'm accountable for evaluation. And that may also lead to new policy setting that will clarify. Anytime we get into an argument, that means there's a policy that maybe needs to be created to resolve that policy and make operations smoother.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Jerry. That's brilliant. Yeah, very true. So that that feedback that we get really is so important, because then you can adjust and make it, even better. Mukunda, where were we in the questions? If I can.
Yeah. Well, we only have a couple minutes left, but let's see. The next one is from Egon. Sorry if I massacre your name. He says, "What circle roles did the managers from the old organization get? Did they adjust easily, and how did they react to the double link back roles?"
That wasn't that easy for the managers, even though they, everyone had the same training. When in actual fact we started, the manager was not the facilitator of that circle anymore. I mean, and of course that's what we encourage, for the manager to remain what I call the functional leader, and then a facilitator is elected. So, I think of the one particular person who I attend the meetings with them to do time out and do some teaching. So I would have to bring him back and say, you're not, let the other person facilitate. You're part of the group. So it's a learning process, definitely. But it takes the time. And how they adjusted easily, they adjusted, some more easily than others. I would have some conversations, one-on-one conversations with the managers at different times, and I was able to clarify and clarify the system, so that they because their reaction is, well, I'm not doing my job anymore. No, it's okay. It's okay. The facilitator can look after this, and you're free to bring in your input just like everybody else is. We're almost out of time there.
That's about it for the questions in the chat anyway.
Okay, good. Thank you. Any show me with your hand. Are you involved in a sociocratic organization at this point? Are you trying it out? Let's see. Yeah. No, for Wes. Ooh. Okay. Well, for those of you that are not, I'm hoping that you're going to be really intrigued and curious now, and you're going to go and check this out and see how you can bring it back in your organization, in your family even. Can't forget that. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I see Alexandra. Yeah. Some hierarchies are very, very traditional, and it's very scary for some people to have that change. It's a change. If you can show them the advantage little by little, that might be a good way to introduce it.